Hey everyone, so I want to talk about what I consider to be one of the most pervasive and potentially dangerous myths in education. Now, we have to understand too that there is a difference between education theory and actual education, the process of educating yourself or supporting another to become educated. The number one myth, as you can see from the title, is that everyone learns differently. It's simply not true. The reason why people, number one, think that, and two, believe it, and three, why it's so widespread as a myth is because our experience seems to confirm that idea. But we don't consider that it is more of a symptom rather than an actual reality or a fact in and of itself, or a condition in and of itself. It's simply a symptom of not doing something properly. So, for example, here's a good example. And analogies aren't necessarily persuasive, but it will help you think about it in a different way. Because I'm not really here to persuade as much as I am just to support you to think about something differently. Okay, and I'm going to go through a few examples and some theory, if you will, also. But I want to start with an analogy. It's kind of like if let's say you were in an environment where the food was extremely unhealthy. It was only just a bunch of fast food. That was all there was to eat. So everybody ate this fast food every day, and everybody was very unhealthy. And therefore you said, well, clearly eating makes you unhealthy. And because you don't have any other frame of reference. So you just look at the condition of things and you're like, well, everybody obviously is, unhealthy, and everyone's eating this food, and so obviously eating makes you unhealthy. And so we then believe that because of this circumstance we've manifested, because you don't have to eat those foods, right? Let's say there was physically existing an alternative, right? But that was just the food that everyone ate. You would conclude that everyone who eats is unhealthy, therefore eating is unhealthy. It's not actually correct logic. It's induction rather than deduction, right? So inductive logic can obviously lead to problems sometimes, right? Like, for example, someone comes in the door and you say, oh, they're wet. So every time they come in the door, they must get wet when they're outside. But that's not logical, right? So considering that point in terms of how does that apply to the idea that everybody learns differently, okay? First of all, I know it's not true, not just based on theory. With TechnoTutor, we do lots of reading assessments. I mean, I don't even know, I haven't counted how many reading assessments I've given personally, reading speed, comprehension, and vocabulary. And it's really fascinating. I'm not going to go into all the details of all the results that we've seen from all of that. But one of the things that really is fascinating is, sometimes when I'm talking in front of groups and so forth, I'll bring up the point that, I'll ask, like, who all here thinks that we all learn differently, right? And actually, let me give some context first. So one of the things that we do is we can do these reading assessments where we measure, like I said, reading speed, comprehension, vocabulary. And I'll do those even in a group context. I'll have sometimes, 7, 8, even 10, or I've had 12 people at a time doing this, right? And so I can see where everybody's at. And I can see, like, let's say I have a room where I have people reading, some of them below a kindergarten level, first grade level, some of them at third grade level in that same group, some of them at a fifth grade level, some of them at an eighth or ninth grade level in that same group, some of them at a high school, upper high school level. And I'll have this group where everybody's at different reading levels, right? And based on talking to everybody, you can just see everyone's at a different level. Some people are very quick, some people are much slower. You can just see that. And when we put them on TechnoTutor, all of them at the same time, and we teach them advanced technical medical terminology with meaning, and then all of them within no more than 15 minutes, generally speaking, all of them are at a 100% perfect recall without even thinking about it. In fact, there might be sometimes one person who, after they go through the process, starts trying to remember what the answer to something, and then I say stop thinking, and they stop for a moment, and then they remember the answer, because it's the thinking process that gets in the way. And this kind of leads me into the next point. But before I get to that, actually, this is why I say I know everyone doesn't learn differently. Everyone actually learns the same way. The theory not only backs it up, if you obviously are able to comprehend and put it all together, but also just from doing it many, many times and seeing that in fact people with different learning speeds and different learning abilities and comprehension abilities can all learn the same thing to 100% efficiency. And some of them might take only a few minutes to learn it, some of them might take a little bit longer, but it's fascinating because it's more a matter of how quickly they can understand the actual process of using the technology. And the slower they are at that, then that's just why it takes them a little bit longer. But we can take that entire group with one person leading the entire group, not teaching anything, just having everybody, directing everyone on the technology. They can all be brought to 100% effectiveness, understanding, comprehension, recall, and so forth. With, like I said, advanced medical terminology. You can do this with foreign languages. You can do it with anything. And then demonstrate it and have everyone demonstrate it in front of everybody. And it's funny because I've done this in groups and kind of tested out how I ask questions and so forth. And I'll ask people, okay, so right after we've done it, right? And then everyone's learned it. And then I'll go, okay, so you know that saying, everyone learns differently? And everyone's like, mm-hmm. Like, who believes that? And everyone raises their hand. Almost always, well, actually, I've never had anyone not raise their hand or agree with that statement. I was like, who all here, believes that statement, that everyone learns differently? They all raise their hand. And I go, so that's true? Do you believe that's true? And they're all like, yeah, of course. Like, we all know this. Like, it's a fact, we know it, right? And I said, it's not true. It's absolutely not true. And they're all kind of like, what? Every time I say that to somebody, they're like, because like you're hitting like a core belief. And I say, look around you. All of you just got to 100% using the exact same method of learning. And they're all like, and they all look at each other like, oh, wow. So I prove it to them right there in front of their own eyes. It's fun. So that's why I'm not just basing it on some theory. Like, I know it's a fact. But I'll give you a couple of examples to help understand why this is the case. And for you to see for yourself, because even if it's a very convincing argument, you still have to see it for yourself and say, well, how do I know it doesn't work? It'll work for me. Well, you can see for yourself. But I'll give you some examples. Think of this, for example. Let's say you take a child. Now, if a person has a physical problem, like let's say they're missing half of their brain or something, or they're in a coma, or like there's something physical, right, that's going to prevent some kind of learning process. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone who's in basically relatively physical, normal operating condition. Doesn't mean they can't be sick or something like that. That's not an issue. But what I mean is, they're not like physically handicapped or deformed from a very, for example, if somebody has severe brain damage, well, I'm not talking about that, okay, but otherwise, then that's what we're talking about. And let's say you take a normal person, right, who's not severely physically damaged, right, a normal baby who's born to parents in America who speak English, okay, and at 1 month old, you take that baby and you give him to a set of Chinese parents in China at 1 month old, and then, just leave, right, and then that family raises that child. If you come back 18 years later, rather, what language will that child be speaking? Right? And I'm guaranteeing whether you said it out loud or whether you just thought the answer, you said Chinese. Notice, I didn't tell you what that child's learning style was. I didn't tell you about the parents' education level or their background or anything. All I told you was, it's a baby. Okay, now let's take a different scenario. Someone who's 35. And then they go to China. They're American, English speaking, they go to China. Okay, even if they're there 18 years. You bring them back. Are they going to be speaking fluent Chinese at the same level that child would be? And you'll, I'm sure, say, no, of course not. Maybe. And there could be some cases where people learn to speak fluently, obviously, as the adults and so forth. But wouldn't you agree, as a vast majority, that's not the case? I mean, look at how many people come to America, for example, as immigrants in their, middle age or even in their 20s or so forth, and never fully learn to speak English fluently as if it's their first language, which is what exactly what would happen for that baby in that example. And I didn't tell you their race either. I didn't tell you anything about them. All the fact is they're a baby. So the point is, when you're a baby, you're in this, what we call the natural learning ability phase. And so what that means is you're just automatically absorbing and copying patterns. It's like a built-in function of our body. It's like in your computer, when you get a new computer, it has a built-in function, like let's say a USB port. So if you put a USB in there, it'll automatically download information, if you drag it over. It's just built into the functionality of the computer, and we have that same functionality as adults. We have the ability to absorb information and copy patterns and so forth. But the problem is if that's not directed properly, so if you don't learn, and the other point to consider is there's a window, right? And this is well-established psychological fact. Like, this is not something I made up or that we made up. It's in all of the research. Even in the reading research, they say that the best time to teach a child to learn how to improve their reading skills is, one, when they're pre-literate, because it's in the window where they're absorbing most effectively and without any without the sort of barriers that come up as adults and so forth. But of course, the problem that they say in the research is that the problem with that is the child's pre-literate. So the best way they know to teach a child new vocabulary is through reading. Okay, so, and that's the problem. So they're saying the best way to improve a child's reading ability is to teach them to learn new words. But in the system, the only way they know how to do that is to give them books with new words in it. But the best time for the child to absorb new words is in the pre-literate phase, which means you can't give them books because they can't read the books and therefore absorb the new words. So it's like this catch-22. That is a fundamental fact accepted by the education system, and it's what all of these books and so forth are based upon. And that's what probably most teachers would assume, most parents would assume, is that, basically everyone's different, right? But it's not the case that everyone is different from that perspective. Everyone learns the same way. Like, when you're a baby, you're automatically absorbing everything in your environment. That's what happens for everybody. And so the reason why you see people at different levels and so forth is because everyone is getting a different foundation because they have a different environment, and no one is there directing the process to make sure they learn every word, every meaning, and fully comprehend, and then build slowly but surely upon their understanding so that they understand everything in a logical way without misunderstanding, without any emotional bias or anything within any of that. Right? So this is what happens then, is you have this consequence where you start to overcompensate in a certain area. Like, this is why you have some people say, I'm more of a math person, and one person says, oh, I'm more of a English language arts type person, or a verbal type person, or something like that, because they didn't get a proper foundation here. And so from a young age, there seems to be a weakness. And so since the parent or the caregiver or the educator sees that and they don't know how to support the strengthening of that weakness, they then cater to this side, and then the child becomes not overdeveloped, but just developed in that area, but not in this area. And so the whole point, one of the points of TechnoTutor, is to be able to go back, reutilizing that natural learning ability, and then restore any of those weaknesses into an effective point. And we do that through the natural learning ability, but the education system doesn't utilize the natural learning ability. It only utilizes the conscious mind, which is why it's all based on memorization, because that's the best you can do. And so, psychology, when you go and see a therapist and so forth, when you're talking to a therapist, they're just speaking to your conscious mind. It's not changing the memories and the way information is structured within you. It's not changing the way you feel about things. So, a therapist can give you advice or ask you questions and so forth, but it doesn't restructure the way that you automatically, unconsciously process information. So it doesn't change how you fundamentally interact with the world and so forth, and doesn't change your nature. All right. And one thing you'll see, and I'd highly encourage you to check out the videos on my YouTube channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, go check out my YouTube channel. If you're on YouTube, check out the playlist called TechnoTutor Experiences from Real People. Check that out, because and if you're on Facebook, just go to my YouTube channel. It's under Cameron Cope. But check out those videos, because you'll see these are people who are genuinely expressing how they've changed and grown from using TechnoTutor. And, teenagers, young adults, older adults, parents, right? Their experiences with their children and so forth. And you'll see this is fundamentally different. This is like fundamental change, not just, oh, I did better in school. Like, yeah, we have that too. We have the people who've gone on to the highest levels in academics and so forth with using TechnoTutor. But from my perspective, that's that type of result just appeals to a certain type of person, somebody who wants their child to be academically advanced and have advantages and scholarships and all that stuff, which is fine. But we're going way beyond just that, because our starting point is to fundamentally support this world to change to be best for all. And the only way to do that is to support each individual to restructure the way that they relate to this world and their starting point from which they live, which is the starting point of whether they give. Because, as Jesus said, when, if you read his words, he said the key to living is to give as you want to receive, right? That's the key to life. And so, but we have a world that's based on competition, it's based on lack, it's based on fear, it's based on the idea that poverty is the natural state of the human being, without realizing that's just because we haven't educated ourselves as individuals properly to be able to sustain ourselves and to function effectively in a world which requires us to give equally to everyone, right? And or at least to be okay with that instead of fighting it and so forth. And instead we have accepted at a fundamental level that we have to compete and fight, and therefore it's the survival of the fittest. But those are just ideas. Those are not proven facts. Those are just theories that we have accepted, which we're being indoctrinated with in the school system and so forth, instead of really considering how we could live from the starting point of what's best for everybody. But that's vocabulary, right? That is a set of vocabulary that once you're past the natural learning ability phase, you can hear the words of Jesus, if you will, right? And I'm not promoting Christianity. I'm just saying there's truth in that, right? You can hear those words, but not live from that perspective. So it's fascinating because you can have people who espouse those ideas, but then also support a system of competition and so forth. So they're not actually compatible, right? Doesn't mean we can't compete in effective ways where we compete to improve the balance of life on earth, like in a healthy way, but that's not what we have today. What we have today is a competition where it's really just whoever can make something cheapest, which sounds good, but if you make something real cheap, you can't even pay people effectively to do that work, which is why you see automation starting to take over, because that's the only way they can make it cheaper sustainably. And you have to make things that they don't last, because you have to be constantly buying a new one to replace it because it was so cheap. So buying one of them, even if it was the best one, doesn't sustain that corporation if the whole idea is profit and competition and so forth. So you can see it's a whole messed up system. And no system that has ever been suggested so far, doesn't matter which one, will ever work, because it's all within the context of that basic starting point. Even communism and so forth, socialism and all of those things, still within the same fundamental starting point, which is the starting point that human nature can't be changed. Okay, so we have a totally different starting point in terms of what is education, because how you educate a child and how you educate a generation will determine the political systems, the economic systems, and so forth. So if we allow those systems to determine what is the education of the child, we're only going to get more of the same, right? Input in and output, right? So that's fundamentally where we're coming from, and that's why think about the simplicity of the fact that if everyone does learn the same way, which they do, of course, that may be challenging for some to accept until they see it for themselves, right? But since that is true, it means that a solution is possible, because we can re-educate everybody effectively. It will take time, it will take dedication, and it takes people who really care, right? But we have a business, right? So it's not like you have to just sacrifice yourself, because that wouldn't work either, right? That whole idea is also, of sacrificing yourself for the common good and all that. That's also just a form of indoctrination that's put through our education system and religious systems and so forth, so that nobody ever actually challenges anything, right? And so it's not about sacrifice, it's not about revolution, because revolution means to turn back, and it just means that we're going to get more of the same again, right? So it's not about any of those things. It's about fundamentally changing who I am, and you fundamentally changing who you are, so that we bring ourselves up to our fullest potential as human beings. And that's what real evolution is. It's not something that happens to us, it's something we do for ourselves, right? Because that's what it means to be fully self-responsible as a human being. And until we have a world of self-responsible, self-willed individuals, then we're always going to look to some kind of a leader. So then we can't really complain what we get. The only way to make a difference in this world, really, which is what everybody wants. Everybody wants a world that's best for all. There's a lot of fear around that idea because we see all these attempts to do that. But again, they're all done from a starting point of you have to just force everybody into something, because the person themselves can't fundamentally change. So with taking these ideas that we have as adults, we can fundamentally re-educate ourselves to approach life from a different perspective. And it's not just about the bigger picture of, changing the world, because it's really about changing yourself, like changing the nature of your relationships. Wouldn't you rather have a relationship with your spouse where you see eye to eye really, and you're equal to each other, and you really support each other, and you don't backstab each other, you're not spiteful towards each other, you're not always competing with each other, you're not holding secrets from each other, you're actually supporting each other as equals. And the same thing with your children and with your family members and people that you work with, or just people in your environment. Wouldn't you want that kind of a world, right? But it's only possible through self-education. And so if we don't take that responsibility on within ourselves, then we can't complain about the result of this world. And unfortunately, because the world at the moment is based on human nature as it is, it's just the outflow of that. And you can see that, just look within yourself, what that's like. That's why things are slowly but surely just going downhill, and it will continue down that path until people realize, like, hey, there's got to be another way. And so for those who do realize that, and they say, I want to re-educate myself for real from a different starting point, that's the ones that hopefully will find TechnoTutor, right? And I say hopefully just as an expression, but the reality is that's my purpose. I'm not going to stop until everyone who is open to it is able to find it, and we'll find more and more people who want to share that. So for those of you who are doing that, keep it up. And for those who are watching this video and kind of like, wow, this is kind of interesting, I haven't heard these kind of concepts before, feel free to give me a comment or something, share this video, and watch all the other videos that I've done, and that the people that are in our network have done as well. So, all right, and check out that playlist called TechnoTutor Experiences from Real People on my YouTube channel. All right, until the next time, I'll see you later.